Hello there, and welcome once again to the series I'm doing on how to obtain your ham license. We're up to part 9. This whole thing started back in December. We've come quite a ways. At least I have, and several others who have contacted me have come a long ways. As I said in my last video, they also got their ham license, and once again, I'm real proud of them, and they should be very proud of themselves. Part 9. Which is the one you're looking at right now, will involve constructing the antenna that I plan to use for my Heathkit HW101 transceiver that you saw in an earlier video. And I'll be using what's called a G5RV. G5RV antenna. I'll be building it. And I learned about it, maybe 6 weeks ago, maybe a little longer. I was asking people, geez, I'd like to have an antenna that's, that doesn't lock me into one band. I want something maybe that I could not have to stick with, say, the 20 or the 40 or meter band or whatever. And somebody said, well, what you need is a G5RV. What's a G5RV? Well, it turns out there was a fella, I took a few notes here. Back in 1946, there was a fella named Louis Varney, big-time ham guy, or amateur radio guy. And his call sign was G5RV. Now, Louis Varney invented an antenna, a multi-band antenna. Let's wait till this truck goes by here. Anyway, Louis Varney invented a multi-band antenna that covers 10 to 80 meters. But you have to have a tuner to go with it, because as you change from one band to the other, the tuner has to tune it in. You just can't throw up an antenna and it'll just work on anything. You've got to have a tuner with it, which will require an additional expense. So I'll be buying one of those MFJ tuners, 949Es or 939E. I can't remember the name of it. Louis Varney died. He lived to be 89 years old, and he died in the year 2000. And they named the antenna after his call sign, G5RV. And basically what it is 2 horizontal wires, each one 51 feet long, and they're connected to a feed line. I intend to use flat TV cable, the old brown TV cable that many of you saw as a kid and still use today. It'll be about 28 feet long, the flat lead, and the flat lead will come down from the center where those two 51-foot pieces of horizontal 14 gauge wire come together. The twin wire will go down and then hook to a coax cable, and the coax cable will then lead into my antenna tuner, which will be sitting on top of my transceiver or close by. So it's a pretty simple antenna. This is basically a dipole, di meaning 2, and the twin lead will have to be a exact length. The TV flat twin lead will have to be 28 feet. And then after that, when I hook on to the coax cable, the coax can be any length I want. It could be 100 feet if I wanted, if I needed it to get it into the house. So the frequency range that the antenna will cover is 3.5 to 28 megahertz, which is the 10 to 80 meter range. 3.5 to 28 megahertz. So that's what I'll be building. And I started out, what I'm going to hold the whole mechanism together will be a piece of square plastic. The 2 wires will come in, the feed wire, the flat TV twin lead will come from the bottom. It'll all be hooked together on this piece of heavy plastic. And I needed a piece that was really heavy, so after a trip to Walmart, I came up with this cutting board. So this is really solid, really a solid board, good and sturdy. And I said, boy, that would be just what I need. All I need to do is cut out a small piece, which you can see I've already done. It's right here. This is the piece that came out of here. It's 4 inches by 4 inches. I just put it on my chop saw. I measured it, put it on my chop saw, and came down, spun it around, and then came down to chop saw again. I then took it to work. We have a sanding disc there, machine. I just worked it over on the sanding disc, smoothed it around, rounded the edges, and then I marked these little holes. Right, these are where the holes I'm going to drill for the antenna to come in from the side. And where the flat wire is going to come up from the bottom. This larger hole right here is going to be for suspending it in the tree, and then of course the wires will run out each side. Here's my 14 gauge wire. It cost me 21 cents a foot at the local hardware store. I got 105 feet of it in case I make a mistake, which I might. And the size of the holes I'll be drilling in this will be, the smaller holes will be 3/16, which will be these holes right here. And the larger hole will be 1/4 inch right here. If I find out I need them larger, I'll just make them larger, no big deal. I'm going to also bevel the holes. I have a little bevel tool that I can bevel the holes a little bit, take off the sharpness so it doesn't cut any wire. So the next time you see me, the holes should be drilled and we can maybe start on this thing in earnest. Stick around. Alright, as you can see, I've cut the wire into two 51-foot lengths, and I also picked up the flat twin lead that I'll be using, the TV type of cable I was telling you about, rated at 300 ohms. And there were two different types. One is the flat, thin, cheap crap, which I took a look at and I said, this won't hold up very well. You know, the wind will whip that baby around. It'll be tore up in no time. Then again, it may last 200 years. You never know, but I didn't want to take the chance. So I went with the thicker stuff. It has a, looks like a nylon inside. You can see that white area there. I don't know what they actually would call it. And it has the thicker brown outside, which makes it very strong. I have more wire that I can solder with, to deal with. Compared to the two, you can see that one is very thin, one is very cheap looking. Anyway, so I bought 28 feet of this. You can buy whichever one you want, but I recommend the stronger stuff, especially if it's going to be up in that tree. And where I live, sometimes we get some hellacious winds that blow around here. I also drilled all the holes in the mounting board for all the wires. Now keep in mind, this is just one way of doing this. There's people that put them inside PVC pipes. They do all sorts of things. This is just one method. I happen to like this method. I did wind up drilling the holes larger. This one and this one over here. And I drilled it larger so the thimble, these are called thimbles, would fit in there. The wire will wrap around the thimble. First I threaded it through this little deal right here, and then after it wraps around the thimble, it'll come back out and go into that second hole. I'll set that up and show you what that looks like now. Okay, now you can see the complete assembly. I've got the thimble, the little cincher, I don't know what the heck they're called. I picked them up at a hardware store in town. Then of course the little U-bolt here, which is clamped up, but not like a gorilla. You don't want to tear up your wire. And then that left a loop of wire, and the loop of wire around the back of this thing, I put a connector on it and soldered it. And then I fastened it through the hole with a couple of washers, a bolt, and a lock nut, or a lock washer. Now the flat wire, twin lead flat wire, will come up and it'll go underneath this thing right here and be cinched down with these two screws. This will give us strain relief here, just like we have the strain relief right here. And then I'll put another connector on the end of this wire sticking out right here on the flat lead, and there'll be a second connector put over here, and I'll center this up about like that, I guess, so I have an equal distance. And then I'll also cut back a little ways so I have a little more room to work, and I'll have a second connector on the underneath the flat washer. That'll go underneath the flat washer of this bolt right here. So I'll have two of those. I'll have a setup like that on one side and a setup like that on the other. And what I have basically here is a nice strong strain relief, so when the wind blows, this thing won't just pull the wire and break it all to pieces. And this one here will have a strain relief to where it won't break all the pieces either, and it'll be fairly strong. Now keep in mind, this is just one way of doing this. Again, this hole in the center here is where I'll put, I'm not sure exactly what kind of a mechanism I'm going to put there to raise that thing up in the air into the tree. That'll be my raise point. I may just take some very thick copper wire and solder it together and just a loop and lift it up with that. I don't know, on both sides. So I'll get back to you when that's all completed.